Hi, this is Jeff with FrostyGarden.com, and today we're going to be talking about our container gardens. We're also going to talk about how we irrigate those container gardens. We use some pretty interesting and unique methods in our container gardens, and so if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, you're going to want to come along for the ride. As always, if you like our content, we'd love it if you gave us a subscription, or do whatever, we don't really care. Since we're growing in an extreme northern environment, container gardening gives us some really good things that we really need. The biggest of which, it promotes warmer soils. But also, container gardening is great because it allows you some uncommon gardening locations, such as on a deck, which can protect your plants against things like moose, deer, and other predators that might be feasting on your plants. Container gardening is also an excellent technique for new gardeners to get into. Since it doesn't require any dedicated space or special preparations, any new gardener, even if you're a renter, can get into container gardening quite easily. We're going to show you how we do container gardening on a very large scale. We've been growing food in containers for a very long time. It's actually how I got started in gardening to begin with. I used to use fairly common fabric pots as my methodology for growing in containers. But once I started gardening off-grid, that changed. We found that basically containers and fabric pots were very inefficient in their use of water, so I needed to seek out a way for us to use rainwater catchment and conserve as much water as possible. It just wasn't practical because we were losing better than 50% of our water to that inefficiency. We considered several different options for our container gardens in order to conserve water. The first of which was drip irrigation, and the second was hydroponics. Both of those are extremely water efficient. But ultimately, I ended up settling on a technique called sub-irrigation. Sub-irrigation is a lesser used technique, but it's one that I like a lot. We practice it a lot with our seedlings, and basically what that means is that you are watering the plants from underneath or beneath the soil. We liked sub-irrigation because it used all of the soil techniques that we would normally use, and so we were very comfortable. All of our fertilizers, all of our soil would transfer straight across, as opposed to like hydroponics, which would be a radically different solution. When I was looking for different ways to get into sub-irrigation in our containers, I remembered a Kickstarter product that I had seen many years prior called GroBuckets. And basically when I started looking for them, I figured out that they had already become a commercially available product, and so I could just buy them from Amazon. That was pretty cool, and so we decided to start with a small trial of about 30 of those buckets. That might seem like a lot of buckets, but in the grand scheme of our container gardening of over 100, that was about a third or a little bit less than a third of our entire garden. So it was a good trial to start with. So since you're watching us now, you might know that that initial trial provided us some amazing results. We tried a lot of different kinds of plants in those grow buckets. We grew everything from potatoes, brassicas, peppers, tomatoes. We kind of threw the gamut at it, and in every case, it provided exceptional results. So the following season, we decided to go all in with the grow buckets. We went from fabric pots over to this. Most importantly, though, it significantly allowed us to conserve our water. We were, for the very first time, able to keep our container garden entirely off the water grid. We used rainwater catchment as our sole source of water, and that was really an important goal for us. The grow buckets allowed us to achieve that goal. Since grow buckets might be somewhat new to a lot of you, let's talk about what it actually is. Basically, a grow bucket is a kit that you can get that turns a standard 5-gallon bucket into a sub-irrigated container. So essentially the kit contains an insert that goes all the way at the bottom of the bucket, and then it also contains a piece of PVC tube that connects into that insert. And what that allows is for about a gallon of water to be kept at the very bottom of the bucket, and you fill the bucket with water using the PVC insert that goes into that insert down below. And basically, since you have constant contact with water underneath the soil, that water will wick into the soil and keep a nice, even moisture level across all of your soil in the container. That's really advantageous, especially for things like tomatoes, because essentially tomatoes need constant contact with moisture, and so the grow bucket solution ensures that. So fast forwarding into the future, where we were operating almost 100 different grow buckets, we figured out quickly that it was very laborious for us to fill all of those grow buckets. Since each bucket takes about a gallon of water, it was taking us many hours to fill those 100+ buckets that we were operating. So we decided to centrally irrigate via an off-grid solution our GroBuckets. And now we have 2 gardens that are fully off-grid irrigated, and that makes it really easy. And then we also use standalone GroBuckets as the manufacturer intended. So we have about 70 total buckets that are centrally irrigated, and then the remainder of about 40 or so are all standalone and operating like they should. Our GroBucket irrigation system uses 3 major different components. The first is a reservoir, the second is what we call a control bucket, and the third is a distribution manifold that basically gets the water into our individual buckets. What we love about this system is that it's extremely low tech. It entirely relies on gravity and a float valve in order to control everything. It's got almost nothing that can go wrong with it, and it's performed for us exceptionally well over many, many different years. One of the main technical keys behind our irrigation system is that all of the GroBuckets have to be on the exact same level. This is a really important thing because we're basically creating a giant adult float level, if you will. And this is really easy in some locations, for example on our deck garden here where we're already dealing with a flat surface. But in our greenhouse, we had to develop a solution in order to get all of the buckets all at the same level. So we used basically 2x4s to create a frame, some bricks, and some spacer blocks in order to create an even level for all of our different buckets that we were operating in our greenhouse. Once we had that going, then we could complete the rest of the system. At the heart of our off-grid GroBucket irrigation system is our centralized reservoir. This is a 32-gallon Rubbermaid trash can that we've turned into a reservoir. It's a very similar technique to like what you would use for creating a rainwater barrel. The important thing is that this reservoir is physically above the buckets, and so we've used some bricks here in order to elevate this reservoir above the actual buckets, and this allows us to drain the entire reservoir. This system could also be hooked up on grid if you so desired, and instead of using a reservoir, you can just hook the water supply up to a hose bib like on your house. It's a very flexible system overall, but since we had off-grid needs, we wanted to use a reservoir. The next important component is our control bucket, and in our greenhouse this sits back here. This might seem really complicated, but it's actually very, very simple. Essentially, it has an input that comes from the reservoir, or maybe a hose bib in your case, and an output that goes into the distribution manifold. And inside, the input has what's called a float valve in it. Float valves are not scary. Basically what it does is it will regulate the level of water, and whatever level that float valve sets the water level to in that control bucket is the same water level that will be seen in all of the rest of the other buckets. And again, that's because those buckets are all at the same level, as well as the same level as the control bucket. For the distribution manifold, we settled on using standard irrigation tubing as our general solution. So from the control bucket, we go through 1/2-inch irrigation tubing to basically where we need to get the water to. And then from the 1/2-inch irrigation tube, we size it down to 1/4-inch irrigation tube. Then, in the bucket itself, we have 6mm holes drilled at the very bottom of the bucket, and then we use what's called a uniseal, which is a watertight seal that can sit into that 6mm hole, and it fits a 1/4-inch tube perfectly. So we just stub this in, and it's good to go, and it's fully watertight. So what we love about this solution is that it's extremely flexible. It supports all kinds of different layouts. If you were going to do multiple levels where you wanted those containers at multiple levels, you would need a container or a control bucket per level that you were trying to do. But this is very, very flexible overall. The other nice thing about this solution is that we only have a single point where we actually need to water. We just fill the reservoir, and then from there, gravity takes care of everything else. In our solution, we designed a 32-gallon reservoir to handle about 32 or 36 buckets. And that's generally worked for us in our climates. But in a warmer climate, you might want to go with much larger reservoirs in order to deal with the transpiration that your plants are going to have to deal with. They'll absorb water faster, and they're going to need a lot more water than where we're at in our colder climate. If you're interested in a much deeper dive into our irrigation system, we did a full build guide and write-up on the solution. There's a link down in the video description that'll tell you all about it. So if you're looking for those technical details, that's where you want to go. So how we handle fertilization in our GroBucket solution is we basically treat the solution as if it were a hydroponic one. And what that means is that in our reservoir, we're using exclusively a nutrient-filled solution. Our particular fertilizer has what's called a constant feed rate, which is about a quarter dose of a normal dose, and that's designed for constant feeding of your plants. And so that's how we fertilize all of our plants with this particular solution. It's really good and hands-off, and essentially all we have to do is watch our plants grow and fill the reservoir every now and again. I've been a proponent of container gardening for many years, and it wasn't until this solution that I created that I've been truly happy with container gardening as a gardening solution. It's been extremely flexible and very scalable. When we wanted to increase the system, we can just buy more. It is a little bit expensive to get into the GroBucket solution, but it's comparable to other gardening techniques when you consider it. And for that flexibility and that pinnacle of gardening that a lot of people try to achieve, which is hands-off, just water and harvest, we've achieved that with this particular solution. So we would definitely encourage anyone who's interested in building out a large container garden to consider using this technique. It can grow all sorts of plants. Everything we've tried growing in the GroBuckets has worked. The only concerns we might have are things that would need to be harvested when dry. So, for example, things like garlic or onions might be problematic, but even then you can let the reservoir go dry and the container will dry up just like any other container garden would. Once again, I'm Jeff with FrostyGarden.com. I know we covered a lot of ground in this video, so if you have any comments or questions, do feel free to put a comment down below and we'll try to get back to you on it. As with all video creators, those likes and subscribes really do matter to us. So if you've got one in you, we'd really appreciate you giving us one. Once again, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.